Welcome to this video about risk management or risk handling, covering fundamental concepts, principles and approaches, including topics of risk governance and policies on risk. Risk management refers to all activities used to address risk, such as avoiding risk, reducing risk, sharing risk, and accepting risk. The terms risk management and risk handling are interchangeable. The term risk governance refers to the application of governance principles for the handling of risk. Such principles include aspects like participation, accountability, effectiveness, coherence, and proportionality. This figure is about a famous bolt or boulder, the Terje bolt, not so far away from where I live in Stavanger, Norway. It is a spectacular place. It's 1,000 meters down, and every year 10,000s of people visit the place and leap onto this bolt. I visited the place some years ago, but I did not jump. I was considering doing it when standing on the plateau close to the bolt, and my friends jumped, but I was chicken. I didn't do it. I judged the rewards or benefits of making the jump not large enough to justify the risks involved. Clearly, a failure would have fatal consequences. I gave way to the cautionary principle, which is a fundamental principle of risk management. I'm faced with some potential negative consequences, there are uncertainties, and I do not carry out the activity. My friends did, however, jump onto the bolt. They found the rewards or benefit larger than the risk, and as far as I know, no people have yet lost their life in accidents related to this Terje bolt. To me, this is actually surprising. It shows that people are really cautious when doing this jump. They also give way to the cautionary principle. They are faced with a potential negative consequence, there are uncertainties, and implement measures to reduce the risk by being fully focused when jumping and only doing the jump when the weather is good. The precautionary principle is a special case of the cautionary principle when faced with scientific uncertainties. We will come back to that later. Risk management is to a large extent about finding the proper balance between development and protection. Protection is supported by the cautionary and precautionary principles and related strategies of robustness and resilience. Development, on the other hand, is promoted by taking and accepting some risk in pursuit of values. Risk assessment and other types of analysis provide input to the process of obtaining this balance, more specifically in relation to what option to select, the acceptance of activities and systems, etc. The basic risk management strategies are use of risk assessment, for short being risk informed, giving way to the cautionary and precautionary principles. Vulnerability, robustness, and resilience management are key instruments, and discursive strategies. The discursive strategies and policies use measures to build confidence and trustworthiness through the reduction of uncertainties and ambiguities, clarification of facts, involvement of affected people, deliberation, and accountability. In addition to these strategies, we also speak about the risk-based requirement strategy or use of codes and standards. It's applicable when the situation considered are simple, the phenomena and processes addressed are well understood, and accurate predictions can be made. An example is the specific requirements, for example related to speed limits, used for how to design and operate car traffic safety. The experience is extensive and numerous risk assessments have been conducted. The appropriate strategy in practice would typically be a mixture of these three basic strategies, 1, 2, 3. This figure is a model for the risk handling, from the identification of the issue or problem to the decision using risk assessment and other analysis. The risk issue is often formulated as a task of choosing among a set of decision alternatives or options. Then, risk assessments are performed to understand the risk involved for the alternatives considered. Other studies could also be conducted, for example, analysis of people's risk perception and cost-benefit type of analysis that relates the risk to cost and benefits. The risk assessment and other analysis are used as input to the decision-making process. The decision makers conduct a management review and judgment, MRJ, and then make a decision as discussed in video 2. The precautionary principle. You wake up and feel dizzy. You have not experienced such dizziness before. The plan was for you to go on a longer drive today, but now the trip is cancelled. You think it would be irresponsible to drive in this condition. What you do is to give way to the precautionary principle. This is a basic risk and safety science principles. It applies when we are faced with possible serious consequences of an activity, such as the car trip here, and there's fundamental scientific uncertainty associated with what these consequences will be. Then the principle states that measures must be taken to reduce the risk, meaning possibly not carrying out the activity. In the example here, it is the last thing you choose to do. You do not know what this dizziness means and will not start driving until it is gone. You decide to take it easy today and go to the doctor if dizziness does not go away during the day. The uncertainties can be called fundamental and scientific because you do not know what is causing the dizziness. Most people would probably agree that this is a sensible strategy for dealing with the situation and the risk. The shutdown of societies March 2020 in many countries because of the coronavirus risk is another good illustration of what the precautionary principle means. In this case, we are faced with a potential for serious consequences and there are scientific uncertainties. Accurate models providing accurate predictions what the consequences will be are not available at that time. Because of the uncertainties, science cannot alone lead us to the right decision. Later in 2020-2021, new knowledge about the virus and pandemic is gained, theoretical as well as empirically. And adaptive risk handling is adopted all over the world, combining cautionary measures and scientific analysis. A balance between different concerns are being made. If a company would like to introduce a new product into the market, the precautionary principle can be interpreted as stating that the company has the burden of proof, demonstrating that the product is safe and the negative risk associated with its use are acceptable. Following this logic, there is initially a red light, which is only switched to green when there is convincing evidence of harmlessness. This perspective represents a stand on the balancing act between development and protection. Too much protection hampers development, clearly, whereas too little may lead to accidents, damage, and losses. Risk acceptance criteria. Risk assessments are commonly used together with some risk acceptance criteria or tolerability limits. Examples of such criteria and limits are presented in this table. By introducing the risk acceptance criteria, the idea is to ensure some maximum risk level for values such as life and health that need to be protected. The criteria can contribute to transparency by being explicit about risk so that comparison can be easily made. The criteria can also contribute to consistency. There are, however, a number of challenges and problems associated with the use of risk acceptance criteria for this purpose, as summarized in this table. The criteria build on some risk metrics which may to varying degree actually reflect risk in a good way. Issues of uncertainties or knowledge strength are to a large extent ignored. A specific criterion level can be difficult to justify. The approach leads to prescriptive use of risk assessment, neglecting the importance of management review and judgment. A compliance focus on project level is often the result of using such criteria instead of searching for the overall best solutions for the whole system or activity considered, also highlighting potential improvements over time. Cost-benefit type of analysis, including cost-effective analysis and also multi-attribute analysis. Cost-effective analysis is an approach to try to calculate the effectiveness of a measure, typically risk-reducing measures, by looking into the expected cost of the measure divided by the expected benefit, and in this case is linked to number of saved lives, and that would be referred to as the ICAV, implied cost of averting a fatality. So in this case you have a measure which costs 5 million euros, and expected number of saved lives are 0.25, leading to an ICAV of 5 divided by 0.25, which is equal to 20. The pros is related to that this is an easy approach to compare options and seeing the effectiveness of certain measures. The cons is really that the risk uncertainty is not really captured. We just look into the expected value. So we should be careful using this metric alone to make decisions on implementing, for example, a risk-reducing measure. The VSL, the value of a statistical life, is the maximum amount of money you are willing to pay to reduce the expected number of fatalities by 1. And we can compute the expected net present value by summing the expected cost minus, and then adding the VSL multiplied by the expected saved lives. In this case we have not included any kind of discounting. We assume a life today is the same value as in future years. Now the ENPV approach is the cost-benefit type of analysis. It's based on that if the ENPV is greater than 0, the project or the measure can be justified, and if it's lower than 0, it's not justified. Finally, some words about multi-attribute analysis, and that is simply to not trying to transform all the various concerns into one dimension, for example, then typically money, but to separate the various attributes. In this case is cost, safety, environmental issues, and public view, and provide some judgment, or it could even be assessment or calculations for some attributes, and not for others, just using some qualitative expressions. In this case it's about 2 alternatives, 1 and 2, which is discussed in the book. And then for the cost you have an estimate or prediction, and you have some uncertainty around that number. So this is a prediction interval. Then you have some scores on safety and environmental issues and public view, using some qualitative quantizations. And the question mark indicates some kind of uncertainties linked to that particular judgment. And the advantage of doing this approach is that you are not forced to transform all the attributes judgment into one scale, money, and which could be very difficult, and also giving the problem of weighing the different attributes, and this should be up to the decision maker to really do that kind of weighing. So the weighing of the various concerns are done then by the managers, the decision makers, the politicians, and not by the risk analysts or the analyst in general.
ALARP principle. The ALARP expresses that the risk should be reduced to a level that is as low as reasonably practicable. The principle states that a measure that can improve safety must, as a general rule, be implemented only in the event that one is able to document that the costs are grossly disproportionate in relation to the benefits gained. One can refrain from implementing the measure. It's a principle designed to support protection, as the basic idea is that a measure that will reduce risk should be implemented. Thus it can be said to be highlighting a cautionary thinking. However, in practice we often see that the gross disproportion criterion is verified by using cost-benefit type of analysis. These type of analyses are based on expected values and hence are not giving much weight to risk and uncertainties. The result is that the ALARP become a principle highlighting development more than protection. Alternative ways of verifying the disproportionate criterion are therefore suggested. The essential point is that if the cautionary thinking is to be given weight, measures should also be considered when the computed expected net present value is negative, provided that these measures can contribute to a reduction in risk and uncertainties and a strengthening of the robustness and resilience of relevant systems. A procedure for how to implement the ALARP principle and the gross disproportion criterion in line with these ideas is presented in this figure. If the costs are small, implement the measure if it's considered to have a positive effect in relation to relevant objectives or other reference values. If the costs are large, make an assessment of all relevant pros and cons of the measure, and if the expected present value can be meaningfully calculated, implement the measure provided this value is positive. Also consider implementing the measure if it generates a considerable positive effect on the risk and or other conditions, for example, reducing uncertainty or strengthening knowledge, or strengthening the robustness in the case of hazard threats and or strengthening the resilience. Vulnerability and resilience management. Consider the example of ventilators used to help the breathing process for patients during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. When planning for a possible pandemic of this type, health agencies and hospitals would consider buying, storing and maintaining ventilators in case of an emergency with acute need for such ventilators. Clearly, a high number of available ventilators would increase the resilience in relation to such a situation and thus reduce the vulnerabilities. However, there's a cost associated with the ventilators, and before the pandemic, these costs would need to be balanced against risk. With hindsight, it's easy to conclude that more ventilators should have been available when the situation occurred, but there are many demands for reduced vulnerabilities and improved resilience, and the resources are limited. It becomes a management and political task to prioritize. Risk assessment and risk science in general provide support for such prioritization. The example illustrates the importance of seeing vulnerability and resilience management in relation to risk. This does not mean that vulnerability and resilience cannot be managed without detailed assessment of what hazards and threats that can occur. If you exercise regularly, do not smoke, eat healthy food and sleep enough, your resilience is in general strengthened in case of potential diseases, whether they are of the known or unknown type. This is the great attraction of resilience management. We can improve resilience without knowing exactly what type of threats that can occur and express the likelihoods as needed in traditional risk assessments. In situations with large uncertainties, this is important as risk assessment then are not able to produce reliable predictions of what will happen. It is of special relevance for complex systems where it's acknowledged that surprises will occur. Another illustrating example of the importance of vulnerability management is cybersecurity. A cyber system may suffer from a number of vulnerabilities in the sense that if it's exposed to a specific type of threats, it fails. Focusing on vulnerability and resilience management, the aim is to eliminate these vulnerabilities or reduce the consequences if they occur. The experts can, for example, improve the design architecture of the system and how it is operated. The basic idea is that if there is a vulnerability present, it will be exposed at some time. Of course, in practice, there will always be some need for considerations of risk, as the improvements may have strong economic implications, and prioritizations may be necessary. Yet, vulnerability and resilience management would systematically look for ways of making the program or system better from a vulnerability and resilience point of view.